So, so everyone, thank you for joining us. We're kind of talking off the cuff right now as a small group because for holiday reasons, we're going to talk a little off the cuff about ontology engineering. Um, you know, Open discussion. So Bill just mentioned a paper that I authored last year on healthy aging, solitude, and gerotranscendence as part of this large NIH grant that my team and I received in 2004 at this point. We're essentially constructing ontologies for solitude constructs, like, feeling lonely, being isolated from one another, and the kind of, consequences for your health and well-being that might have, as well as gerotranscendence, which is this feeling of connectedness to something bigger than yourselves that people tend to experience as they get older. And so this grant was focused on building models of these constructs, largely because psychologists in the literature are kind of a little with like hand wavy about what they're measuring, what solitude means, what gerotranscendence means. Like it's not always clear that this researcher team over here is modeling the same construct when they say solitude as this researcher team over here. It's actually this phenomena, like we're familiar with it as ontology or people who are interested in ontology engineering. It goes by the name of jingle-jangle fallacy in psychology literature, or like the jingle-jangle problem. It's like, how do I know the construct you're talking about is the construct I'm talking about? How do we know that the phenomena we're talking about is picked out by a construct, right? So this is kind of double-edged sword. This grant we pitched this, I was pitching this because psychology research is, to my mind, one of the hardest areas to model. It's really cutting edge. It's like a lot of growth. Psychology is not it's not a very old discipline. It's spun off of the Catherine Wheel of philosophy somewhat recently, and because of that, psychologists, following traditional trajectory of scientific development or discipline development, it's not always obvious to them how, like psychology researchers, how to cordon off maybe more philosophical questions from the questions that are more appropriate to their science. And so that will come with time. And this is not a phenomenon peculiar to psychology. This has happened in physics as well. Like Newton laid down equations that people are like, oh, look at that. We can measure celestial orbits. Before that, people were asking deep questions like, what is inertia? Like, what's the essence of inertia? What is the essence of like motion? Or the Cartesians famously objected to Newton's equations by saying, "Yeah, but what is gravity? You've modeled what it does. What is it?" And Newton said, "I feign no hypothesis." Again, cordoning off the more philosophical questions from the questions he considered properly within scope of physics. I think something like that will eventually happen with psychology. I think it's, kind of somewhat early days. And so I think of ontologists with our emphasis on rigor and formalization as coming in and maybe kind of accelerating that process in psychology, accelerating in very much in the same like manner that Newton had accelerated progress in physics. And also for what it's worth, like later physicists laying down more like rigorous mathematics for physics, like did the same. So Hilbert laying down the a formula, mathematically modern groundwork for Euclid's geometry was very helpful for mathematicians and physicists so they could figure out where the lines were between their disciplines. I think that's what we're doing. It also, when we're thinking more properly about constructs like solitude, constructs like gerotranscendence, there are all these theories about like they use these terms, like these computatively use these constructs. It's not always clear what evidence you gather supports what theory and what not. And my hope is that if we're rigorous about our characterizations of what is meant by these constructs and what is meant by the theories, then when we look at the empirical evidence, it becomes clear to determine what's justifying what theory and what's not justifying or disconfirming other theories. Where right now it's a little bit messy, and so it's hard to see like have really refined experimentation that does just that. And so I think a lot of folks feel like in psychology literature or psychology research, because it's like the human mind and stuff, it's kind of almost inappropriate to think about things so rigorously. I strongly disagree. I just think we have to be more precise and not argue about labels, argue about what they do, right? As we often do in ontology engineering. And I may be wrong. I don't think I am, but definitely I don't think the field would be hurt, even if I am wrong, by having the kind of additional rigor that we're trying to bring to these constructs. So there's my pitch. If it was my pitch for the grant, kind of make it make it open, more readily accessible to abductive reasoning, like confirming and disconfirming abductive reasoning, while also helping psychology research cordon off themselves from like traditional, very interesting philosophical questions that often come up, like because as you can imagine, psychologists sometimes end up asking rather philosophical questions, and it's not always obvious to them where the lines are between their discipline and like traditional philosophy. So,
Mhm.
Yeah,
And can I
so
have one
yeah, go ahead.
question? Sorry, yeah. The question is regarding today. So I'm actually doing the same thing in a business. So it's more
nice.
or less like the people are speaking different terms, but that I am trying to, let's say, concretize it for their project. But my question is like also in the problem in the business is that the most of the things, as you said, like belongs to the social reality, so that they are defined in the some context, or the like the source formalization, for example, or there is, if you want to include the document text. And the idea is like, how did you come up with, let's say, how did you convince, or how did you choose one term and then you said, hey, this term is exactly representing that? Like, how did you resolve this issue?
We don't. That's so there's a like I'm
Mhm.
I'm an advocate of disambiguating and
Mhm.
describing the logical space through disambiguation. There are a couple of ways you can interpret disambiguation. I think traditionally in our field, disambiguating has been interpreted as find the right term or the right label and give the best definition for it. That's not
Mhm.
what disambiguation means to me. For me, disambiguating means you tell me as clearly, as precisely as you can what you mean by your labels and or their terms, and I will disambiguate the labels as long as I have a formal definition. So you could say, this is what duck means. I could say, this is what duck means. We could mean different things if we're both careful and we're really precise about what we mean. And I encourage people to do that, and I'll try to
Mhm.
extract precision out of them. What I will do is say, this is John's duck. This is Bill's duck. And
Mhm.
now you might be thinking, John, you're going to explode the space of representations. People are talking past each other. Well, maybe they are, but maybe they're not. And when they're not, it's because I'll be able to create logical definitions that ultimately have the same extension, and I can prove that to them. But
Mhm.
similarly, even if they are disagreeing, I can prove to them where we're disagreeing. So when we're
Mhm.
talking about persuasion, like how do you persuade? Like arguments are about persuasion, proofs are about persuasion. What's better than a proof to persuade? Like by your own lights, you guys aren't talking about the same thing, or turns out you are.
Mhm. Okay.
Mm. John, maybe a quick reaction that might land you a second grant, if, if you're interested. Yeah. So my background is actually sort of philosophy of science in the field of psychology, so it's sort of spot on. I can do sort of a quick recap of sort of like, hey, what was there, where we're heading.
Yeah, yeah.
Or I don't follow it actively, but the group I was in Amsterdam is sort of in the top 10 on specifically this topic.
Hmm.
So I think they still have the same agenda. So there is a huge history in psychology with Freud, obviously,
Hmm.
and he sort of started this whole latent thing, and then people started to quantify latent things, and then you got sort of factor analysis. So I have 10 questions. I ask you to score on a Likert scale from 1 to 10. Do you like this, suffer from this, are hurt by this? Now, and then you sort of score it, and then we sort of assume that those 10 things together mean ask the same thing. And then we can say, hey, there is an underlying factor, ergo, the questions are actually a linear combination of the latent variable plus a
Hmm.
coefficient. That's factor analysis for you. So
Hmm.
that was sort of moving ahead, but you're still sort of in the space of postulating latent things. um, more modern psychology is sort of geared towards skills for the better of the worst, or
Yeah.
worse for better or for worse. No, but they're saying like
Yeah.
they always say like, okay, from a perspective, certainly NIH, it's nice to have the vocabulary, but we want to, here it comes, we want to make the jump to processes where people can actually help themselves.
Hmm.
So it is about the relationship of the concepts and the skills you can teach, or the skills you can teach uh, the the doctors or psychologists, if you will,
Hmm.
so that people can self-manage or be managed.
Hmm.
That's sort of the next thing, and then you have sort of a combined process entity, latent entity sort of thing.
Hmm.
And I think then you're in mainstream therapeutic and medicine, sort of like how do you guide that? And rolling forward, there is perhaps or a question is like, I mean, this is also communication of science up to a certain degree. I mean, you're more into sort of defining things, but it's also about the consensus.
Hmm.
And you also want to then communicate. So perhaps it's an interesting point of view. How do ontologies and communication of science relate?
Hmm.
Are they separate? Should they be separate? For what reason or not? Or is an applied ontology in the medical space actually communication of science? Just saying, sort of like, hey, could be.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's about sort of the two bits. Yeah, one thing is also, I mean, how to measure anything. Now, sort of that Eleatic principle. As long as you're moving the needle in some way, and that's what psychologists have been sailing on. As long as you're moving the needle in something,
Hmm.
you can say I'm measuring something because
Yeah.
something was changed, but
Right.
it's turned around in a way, you know. So
Yeah.
there was something changed, so we assume that there was something there, and
Uh-huh.
that's maybe the last point. That's sort of weird. Normally, you would start with, "Hey, I want to observe something, define something, because
Hmm.
I know it changes this, and because you see it in reality." And I think in latent psychology, they turn it around, which is not invalid, but
Yeah.
there is logically certainly something weird going on. That's
Hmm.
also worth sort of digging out. Like you're sort of affirming the consequent instead of sort of. So you're sort of doing not a modus ponens, but
Yeah, it's like
affirming
you're
of the consequent.
measuring, it's like you're
Yeah,
measuring difference and not change. Like there's something's different. I don't know
something
if
is
it's
different,
like
so
a
there must
change.
be something
Yeah.
that caused it, and I'm going to
Yeah, yeah,
label it.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
there's also something that might is sort of like, hey,
Hmm.
yeah, semi-satisfactory or not. But I think in general, psychology is moving towards the skills and the
Yeah.
processes, and perhaps that adds some semantics. Like
Hmm.
if you have an ontology of processes that actually help, then you are gathering evidence over longer trajectories in a
Hmm.
natural setting of doctors or patients instead of in a laboratory. So
Right.
you could say and that's then sort of the hypothesis testing problem where
Mhm.
1 in 20 is actually sort of
Yeah.
is
That's
accepted or
where
is
the
not
rubber meets.
rejected.
Yeah, that's where I see where the rubber meeting the road. It's interesting when I talk to psychologists like in the academy. So they're like one kind of oddity is like the Gerotranscendence literature is really qualitative, which
Yeah,
it's qualitative. It's a mixed methods basically. So they're like gathering qualitative reports from people, and then they're creating like a kind of way of interpreting it, and they're doing cross-rater reliability checks to make sure that
yeah,
there's some kind of reliability. So there's that. There's like semantics built in over and over again, and like meaning just kind of saturating the space with some numbers or some numerical evaluation. But then at the same time, they there's a there's like a that there's like a almost resistance I find to talk about interventions and see interventions as like helpful for understanding what the broader theory is. And then when I talk to people who are like therapists, like counselors in the world, who are like actually giving it, who are like working with people with cognitive behavioral disorders or whatnot, they're like, I don't really care about the theory. I don't care about your that kind of research analysis. Like I know this works for this patient. I know this works for this patient. This kind of maybe works for this type of patient. They have like a toolkit and they're ready to roll them out. but there's a disconnect between the groups I find, and I think part of it is because of for the theoreticians, for lack of a better term, they're it's not precise enough, like just not precise enough to connect up with the interventions, which is a little weird because like DSM, I think this is one of the reasons like DSM gets a bit of a bad rap. Like DSM is like the predicated in some parts as their like differentiating criteria between entries.
Yeah.
Do they do like separate entries or putatively separate entries? Do they have different interventions? And so there's like a long-standing dispute on whether to include not just PTSD, but complex PTSD, which is kind of long form, experienced over a long period of time. Like, and that the sticking point is always, well, how do you treat in interventions them differently? And a lot of folks seem to say no. So well, they're not different
Yeah.
things. Treat them
Yeah.
separately. And yet
So
again, at the
this,
same time, there's this theory difference between.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, but that's valuable. If you can sort of sit on that sort of thing between process and concept,
Mhm.
that's a very valuable space because then you can start mapping what was then
Exactly.
supposedly different or not, or was it just a very kind doctor, you know?
That's right. Exactly. You just
No,
got
but it all
something
needs to
wrong. Yeah.
just because yeah. I'll,
Yeah.
I'll stop here, but now one more thing. So once you have sort of an ontological modeling of it, you
Mhm.
can start more rigorously um, to analyze this causally.
Mhm.
Because,
Yeah.
and I don't think you're a fan of Judea Pearl.
Oh, I like Judea Pearl. I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. No, because he really injected sort of a
Yeah.
really nice framework for causal modeling. And
Mhm.
I know before him, causal reasoning was mysticism.
That's
These
right.
days,
That's
it
right.
is structured
Yeah. His.
and it is graph oriented.
Mhm.
So I'm like, the, the,
It's a
the
great,
distance
a great
between an
way of
ontology,
modeling. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
an ontology and a Bayesian network is
Mhm.
not that big.
That's right.
Now,
One of
then,
my students this is his thing, causal inference, causal AI is what he's working on.
yeah,
Judea Pearl is like core to that. My
yeah,
gripe for what it's worth with Hudea is not him. It's that in metaphysics literature,
okay,
sometimes people will trot him out as providing answers to metaphysical questions. And I'm like, that's
yeah,
the wrong audience.
yeah,
That's not what he's
okay,
doing. He's doing like very
yeah,
important, just not for metaphysics. But anyway,
yeah, got it.
yeah, I love his work.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll quit it here. This was, yeah, but yeah, nice topic.
Yeah, it is. It's
If you
fascinating.
want to chat on that or, anytime, because I
No, I
think
do.
it's
And it's
interesting.
part of this huge grant I'm part of for the next 3 years. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so
So John,
Jeremy is actually working on Jeremy is handling the AI part. So Jeremy on this project is
oh,
not just about building construct like ontologies to model these constructs, but it's about feeding it into an AI agent like a bot that we can send off to the subject matter experts so they can ask questions to uncover new hypotheses for testing and evaluate the current literature. So we're pulling in from PubMed, from SciArchive, and like organizing all this information as ground truth for the AI agent. Partly, mostly because I don't want our subject matter experts, Julie Boker and my wife, Holland Reicher, who's also part of the grant, I don't want them to learn ontologies. I just want them to use the tool and have that help them as researchers uncover new areas for research. And so they're kind of like they provided some seed terms and competency questions for us, but now they're just like, what do I do now? And I'm like, Jeremy's bot. Play with the bot. Tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me what's right with it. So it's kind of a different strategy for engaging subject matter experts than was traditionally done in ontology circles. Traditionally, you'd have the subject matter expert kind of throughout the process helping you build the thing. To my mind, that's a biased way to build because it gets you in like a single vocabulary, and often you're not pulling from additional research like PubMed and all this stuff. So we're bringing it all together, isolate, kind of creating better swim lanes, I think, to avoid bias and like a single interpretation, while at the same time, I think giving the subject matter experts what they really want, which is not to learn how to be ontologists, but a tool that helps them do their job better. And you, man, you got to see like I'm this is part of like a bigger thing. Like there are other grants, like ontology engineers who are part of separate grants under this bigger umbrella. And yeah, they're all doing it the other way. And I'm like, no. So every time we have meetings, we had a meeting once not too long ago where they had a subject matter expert and they were telling us how they were doing their work, like, have the subject matter expert and got involved and like developing terms. And somebody's like, hey, John, what do you think about this? And I was like, so glad you asked. Don't do that. That was all I could say. I was like, stop. I'm just gonna have to fix your work later. Like, don't do that. Anyway, got a lot of wide eyes. But I mean it though. I mean it. But anyway, Bill, you've been patiently waiting. You were gonna say something?
No, this conversation is making me think. I wish when I was on these different projects, I saw us making progress.
Mhm.
I didn't write down like this use case. This is what I didn't keep like a journal of, and I'll give you a for instance. So, in aerospace, and I've had this happen in the intelligence world too. In aerospace, we were talking about the engine as it's running,
Mhm.
right? So a jet engine, it's running, maybe it's revving higher or lower. And the problem they had is they did not work into their model, the
Mhm.
startup process. So in other words, the pilot sits down and they turn the key and the engine starts up. That's the worst time for an engine. It puts the most strain
Oh,
on the
yeah.
engine.
Yeah, yeah.
So we kept talking about this, and I said, so why don't we just create the class engine startup? And you'd have thought I split the atom right in front of them. And they were like, wait, how do we do that? So, you create that class of thing like an engine startup, and you say
Mhm.
it's part of the process, the bigger process of from the time it start up and it takes off and then it lands in those flight processes. But that one little thing unlocked a whole bunch of
Yeah.
things that were kind of hiding, right? And then it was a thing you could attach data to.
Hmm.
Oh, so they're out in the world. There's someone starting up their jet engine, and
Hmm.
now we can attach data to that. My point is that I was listening to them like, why don't they already have this in their model? Like
Hmm.
this is, but to them, they just kind of all they cared about. There's an engine running in the world somewhere,
Yeah.
right? But my point is that just adding that one class, and I think there was a couple of other classes that had to be brought in to the startup process.
Hmm.
And my point is that I guess that's disambiguation. Is that disambiguation maybe?
Partly, but to me, and I don't have like a name for a principle under here, but it is certain what you're calling attention to is a principle that's certainly abide by, named or otherwise, which is you'll sometimes hear me describe it as like, oh, what we do is often model stuff that's so obvious you will forget.
I
You
forgot about
to
it.
include it. And it's because we're thinking as like from the machine perspective, we need every single bit. Every single thing needs to be explicit and precise. And so you need to model the engine startup. You just have to because the machine's not going to know otherwise. And it's so obvious that like subject matter experts, they know that. When you call attention to it, they're like, ah, yeah. And I think what's going on sometimes, at least in my experience, when I'm talking to engineers in their various domains, when I point something like that out to them, it's less that it's not exactly that I mean they know to include it. I think what's happening in that aha moment is there's kind of an unlocking of the art of the possible. They're like, oh, I can do that. Oh, I can model. And if I were thinking rigorously and carefully, that's what I would do. And so there's something empowering about that. And it kind of opens the doors for them to be like, oh, well, I should be modeling all the specific parts of this. I hadn't really thought of that. It's so obvious I forgot. But
Yeah.
now there's like, I can help you more spell out the details now that you've kind of unlocked this bit for me. Yeah. I love those moments too. I know exactly what you're talking about. The kind of it was like, yep.
And
Yeah.
and I didn't write them down, and I've had that happen frequently enough where I should have been journaling that. And what that did was that engine startup class,
Hmm.
now you can say, okay, where
Hmm.
did it happen? When did it happen? right? You can start attaching data to that. And they were just like this is so awesome. And I
Yeah.
was like, and I knew I had them there. And then kind of a funny thing, someone at that uh program said, Bill, you're like a drug dealer. You give them a little bit of ontology, and then they they want more. So they get their checkbook out and they start writing checks for more modeling.
I see. I was like, hold up, where's this
So we're
going?
like crack dealers.
Yeah. Yeah, but for the betterment of the population, this is not some kind of CIA operation. We're trying, yeah. 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 Okay. I mean, feather in the cap. And I've not yet in my tenure been called a drug dealer, so you got me on that one. But there is something about like, this is there's something about giving subject matter experts license to talk about things that they know well with like a kind of guardrails for doing that. That is enjoyable. It is enjoyable. They're familiar with the area. They want to think about this. They probably think about it a lot. Now you're giving them not even a different way of thinking about their domain, but kind of like license and direction and a reason to think about it in kind of careful detail in a way they haven't already. And as somebody who likes to model, I mean, there's something very inviting about that, like being precise. Like, what do I think about this? Like, what do I really think about trajectory? Like in physics, what is that? What is an electron? I've certainly been in calls with physicists and been like, hey, what is an electron? And they'll be like, this trajectory, you map this stuff out. And I'm like, no, man, what
No.
is an electron? And then they're like, oh, that's a harder question. I'm like, yeah, let's focus on the harder question. Yeah. But
Well,
they're also like
so
that's
John, I
fun.
think
Yeah.
that's the move from the decision support questions are what the subject matter experts are asking those questions.
Mhm.
And then when we come along with our competency questions, like, well, what do you mean by electron?
Mhm.
Oh, well, everybody, no, not everybody. Like, let's get back to the basics of that question.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it does kind of point or call attention to the different things that we do, right? So I feel like as an ontology engineer, I'm something of a participant observer. I like try to get in the mix and I just want to describe what's going on as carefully as I can with a rigorous language that's, designed to be broad and general and cover all domains. And so there's like slots I can put things into, things that exist in time, things that exist over time, things that are boundaries of other things, like objects that have identity conditions and like boundaries around them, sites, things that can like move through space and time, but they're things can be located in them, right? So I have these like broad categories where I drop things in. And so if I'm talking to somebody, some subject matter expert, they're describing a phenomena and they don't mention processes, I'm like, what? Tell me about the processes. They don't mention boundaries. I'm like, tell me about the boundaries if it's relevant at all. And even if they don't, I can fill in the gaps often based on what they're saying. And I'm building this bigger structure around what they care about. And then I can give that to them. I can show that to them. But certainly, thinking carefully, rigorously about that is more like a description of what I'm seeing and fitting it into this characterization that ideally is designed to be connected up with other characterizations. It's fun, right? It's very inviting, really enjoyable for me. I suspect you guys get that itch too. But really, I think it's somewhat general. People seem to like doing this modeling once they have some guardrails. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because I'm coming from data science. There, you very much see that things are getting verticalized.
Mhm.
So in a way, sort of the knowledge of algorithms is taken for granted. Sort of like, okay, you know that. To be honest, I think what you earlier said, I don't think we really know where we are. I think that's a better characterization. But
Mhm.
anyway, the market seems to think like, yeah, we figured it out, and
Yeah.
now we want you to be an expert in X,
Yeah.
Y, Z in the real estate market,
Yeah.
in whatever. So there you see verticalization
Mhm.
on very shaky ground. So I think software engineering is fairly horizontal. I mean, it
Mhm.
depends, you know. I mean, if you build a guidance system for a rocket, that's really different than doing something for an insurance. But the difference between insurance, a hospital, a bank, a school, I mean, that's zilch in a way, and that's So the services sector, in a way, has one architecture. It's mobile, it's event, it's a bit distributed, a bit of workflow, etc., etc. And there you have a huge. Anyway, you have the horizontal. There is big sets
Mm-hmm.
of similar technology that you could call them a horizontal, but obviously rocket guidance systems is also software and is different. But there is huge swaths that are basically similar. I don't know how that is for ontology, and I'm sort of also trying to crack
Yeah.
that question, like, hey, because having seen Jeremy also sort of being honed in uh, finance and auditing and the books, how do you call them, the ledgering. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it
Mm-hmm.
really helps. I see it helps him to go from one structure that's, yeah, a bit of the motto of my last 2 weeks, to the other structure.
Right,
So
right,
he sort of can say, like, I know BFO, I know how a ledger should look,
right.
and bam.
Yeah. I will say, and just saying, Bill, just on this point. So, yeah, absolutely right. Like the vertical, horizontal stuff, and the kind of assumption of knowledge. I'll say just on the question of ontology as a discipline, we have been no different, right? There has been a long tradition of people assuming in the field that we knew what we were doing and like we have a clear scope of what we're doing. But I can tell you, one of the reasons I left APL to come out to the educational space is because I knew that was false. And I could see that we needed to get really clear about what we do exactly so that we can kind of like not overpromise and underperform. But we can also distinguish ourselves from other groups that are like building data dictionaries or kind of like building taxonomies. Like we need firm swim lanes between these. So this became really apparent when I was a keynote in Ontobros 2 years ago, and I asked the community. I said, "So what is it that distinguishes us from these other disciplines? What is it?" And nothing. I got no good answers. And so last year or this year, actually, I went back and I said, "I asked you guys this question. Nobody gave me a good answer. Here are the answers you gave me. This is why they're not good. But don't worry, I come bearing gifts." I have an answer for what makes our discipline unique. What is it that makes us unique? And this is the rallying cry I've been pushing. Ontology is a tradecraft around which we're building educational programs, and it focuses on interoperability across heterogeneous data sets, plus improving data quality as our kind of targets through systematic disambiguation of logical space. So
Damn.
those are the things that we do that's unique. Like some groups just do interoperability, totally fine. Some groups focus on it, data quality. Some groups do both, but we are, I think, uniquely as ontology engineers,
Yeah.
focused on disambiguating the logical space. We are not in for shrinking. Yeah, we want it all because that's how we help, and that we use that information, the logical space, to help subject matter experts pick out what they're interested in with their questions. Or we kind of help midwife them in to identify what questions they might want to answer in a rigorous logical space. And we set that up for them so they we can then build tooling and applications based off that. And no other
Let
This is
Sonny
discipline does
go. Go
that.
ahead, Sonny.
Yeah.
You're
one was sorry, Bill.
no, no.
One sentence. This is spot on. Obviously, the mission of ISO:
Hmm.
quality and interoperability.
Hmm.
That's exactly. It's in their charter. It's
Yeah.
sort of in the top 10. So in a way, this is from a industry perspective. This is what industry wants and needs also.
That's right.
So it is it you can actually sort of point towards a lot of evidence that
Mhm.
says, listen, these are not two words.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think this is true. And I've cited the ISO documents when I write. I have a paper on this ontology tradecraft. Maybe Bill pointed that out. Anyway, it's there. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I mean, there are a lot of groups who are interested in just this stuff. There are a lot of groups in our space who have like traditionally been considered to be in ontology spaces who are not. So Palantir, they are they're really good at interoperability. They absolutely are. They throw a bunch of Python developers at data sets and they stitch them together, and that's works. They do not set themselves up well for using those mappings to improve data quality, which has been a continued concern for people in contracts with them. So it's kind of an extreme example. They're doing this at scale. They're doing really impressive stuff at scale for interoperability, not so much for data quality. And they'd kind of have to refigure a lot of their architecture to be able to do what we do. Give me a call, guys, if you want some help. But
Someone called them masters of middleware. I
that's
thought like,
yeah.
that's
Oh,
They're good at marketing. Yeah. They're good at a lot of things.
yeah.
Don't get me wrong. They're sometimes over promising, I'll say. But you know what company isn't, except for the company that I run. And they're also not into systematic disambiguation. That's not their thing. Yeah. In fact, I know of no, I'm sure I'm wrong, but I know of no discipline or organization other than what we do that is. There most of the time it's like minimize the state space, minimize the graph search, like minimize it's about reduction so we can compute. And there are ways to have an expansive space that you cut from rather than like at the antecedently shrink it down. And that's what I advocate for. I'm like, build a broader space, cut out what you need from the whole cloth rather than that way you can address interoperability problems. But nobody, no groups that I know are like, yeah, talk however you want. Let me spell it all out in careful, minute detail. Bill, do you want to jump in?
Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
oh, okay, good. My computer's acting up. So we're as we're closing out here, so John, what's your vision of this group going forward? Like, so when we start a new iteration, what do we want to get out of this group?
Yeah.
Because
Certainly.
it was originally entry level people, but now we got not entry level people
Yeah.
participating, which I love. So go
Yeah.
ahead.
So the Ontology 101, vision's the same, like 6-week cycle running through subject matter expert, subject matter expert elicitation, solicitation, as well as design pattern construction, and then out moving that into OWL. That's what I'd like to continue on for the 101 because we're going to need that. But there has always been on the table the creation of a 201 group. And I have a cycle set up for that where folks who've gone through 101 once or twice would then move into that other group and continue their training on different tools. Some of the cycle topics there include like facility with reasoners, using some OWL-based reasoners that kind of feed in from OWL representations from this group, but OWL-based reasoning using Sparkle and Shackle. So getting a little like hands-on with some of the tooling that we use. Of course, throughout that, there's some conceptual modeling that goes on. But honestly, some of the kind of more like next step to my mind, next step modeling that you would learn after this group is going to be benefited by learning how to use reasoners and Sparkle and Shackle, right? Because you're just forced to think carefully about the modeling. And you're forced to think like in the constraints of BFO, for example, in terms of domains and ranges, which makes you think about the disjointness of the hierarchies. And so it's kind of embedded there. So it seems to me a natural progression here. But in answer to your other question, though, despite having more advanced folks in this group, certainly want to leave this space for incoming 101 folks, of which I'm anticipating there to be quite a few more at the beginning of the year because we have a rather large class of students coming in at UB, and they're probably going to want to learn some of the 101 stuff, and kind of in an environment with other people. And we have lost other people who are learning similar levels of things. So, yeah.
Like when I was actually checking the last week, or I don't know, like I was checking your YouTube, the videos. Like maybe one advancement could be that the entities which we are modeling, they could be harder entities. Like for example, the psychological entities. In my opinion, they are far harder than modeling normal physical stuff. And then how to do these things. I guess this is also in the literature. So I'm also doing the research. So I'm like trying to find out like how the people are modeling stuff. But in my opinion, besides the Barry, you, and some like for example Giancarlo, they are also doing some conceptual modeling, but like there is always a gap. So it is not well known, in my opinion, that you can also model these things and then you can implement them, which is a gap basically in the research
Yeah, that's true.
besides the practicality.
Just like I was saying with the theoreticians in psychology and the intervention folks, there's certainly that phenomena that happens here. I'm not going to get on a pedestal here, but I cannot tell you how hard it is to get a paper published about actual implementation work as opposed to like a theory paper. I could get theory papers published all day long, no big deal, with like hand wavy criteria for success, but a paper that actually shows you exactly how to do the step, like walk through the steps and build something, implement something, model something on the ground, and then put it into a machine. Nobody wants it. No journal wants to accept it. I don't know why. To me, that's what's important. So I end up like publishing this stuff in documentation on GitHub repos because nobody wants it. It has a limited audience because of that. But I mean, it's kind of challenging, and I know Giancarlo probably experiences the exact same thing because he has documentation. His team has documentation for exactly this sort of stuff. We talk about it, but getting it published in like the broader research space, almost impossible. It's a pain. That is to say, so I take your point though. Harder topics to kind of tease out some of the subtleties of the modeling. I'm certainly on board for. Usually, I'll find in our conversations, although maybe it didn't come up for the previous examples um, some hard nuggets. They're kind of emerge. Every space has their hard nuggets, and I kind of like to identify those. I've been a little reluctant here in this space to get into the really hard nuggets because of the 101. It's just getting people comfortable. Certainly, much more inclined to do that in a 201 space because we're going to have to, right? The logical subtleties will emerge naturally as we're thinking about more carefully concepts that we're modeling. But yeah, I hear your thirst. I hear your thirst and your hunger for more complications. That is to me where the real progress can be made. I don't want to scare people here though, but maybe I should try to scare them a little bit.
Yeah, one idea, but that's more like because I think for me that's hard, but maybe in general it's hard, and it sort of connects, I think, with ISO or business. It's like that crossroads of planning, information, and reality.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of tension there in how you model it, and that's actually what businesses need. We have a schedule or a plan,
Mm-hmm.
and we have information coming out of that,
Mm-hmm.
and then there is the realization of that process. And I think in a way this could be a course maybe like how do you model a production process
Yeah,
planning? Maybe the factory ontology is already into that, perhaps. I don't
I
know.
think they're good
But
example. But I
but
yeah.
this is really a topic that touches on a lot of stuff. I think
Yeah.
certainly with um, Internet of Things, with IoT coming in, it's
Mm-hmm.
sort of like how do you model IoT or Industry
Mm-hmm.
4.0? Let's put it that way. How do you do that?
Yeah. Given the demand signal, because there certainly is a demand signal for this, I have and the general difficulties I've had in actually publishing on the ground implementations, I've kind of shifted into thinking that I should sell that. And so I have companies where I'm, pitching. I'm like, hey, here's a solution. Let me show you. I can show you exactly how to do it. I can even do it for you. I can evaluate your attempts. And so that's been actually pretty successful running that through Encore. Because there's such a big demand signal for it. The challenge, the difficulty with that though is now it's proprietary. I often can't share it widely. So like I'm familiar, I know how to model this stuff, but it's often well, I've done this over here for them. I'll just do something very similar over here for them because I can't share between them. But yeah, yeah. But
Just to
anyway,
ask like
great points. Yeah,
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 just to ask like for the journal wise, like I couldn't also find like journals as you said. I'm also doing similar,
yeah.
and I was looking like even for the ontology engineering
Mhm.
topic, either you can put it in some semantic web stuff,
Mhm.
or I am also like now I'm finishing up one for the applied ontology because I'm using the BFO things. But
Yeah.
besides that, there is not much to publish, and this
Right.
is like a really problem, in my opinion.
And if I
Yeah.
had time, I would start a new journal called
Uh,
Ontology Engineering, but it's such a
mm.
labor of love and I don't have time. But one day I will.
One-
There needs to be more. But yeah.
Mm.
Well, we are 1 minute over on that. So thank you so much. It was a great conversation as always. Looking forward to the next iteration of the cycle. Tell your friends. We'll have a great time, and in the interim, have a great holiday season. It was great chatting with you guys.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Happy holidays,
Yep.
guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
John.
Yeah.
Great
Bye-bye.
holidays.
You too.
See you next year.
Bye-bye.